The bell over the mercantile door had not stopped swinging when Dade Purcell set both hands flat on his counter, looked past the young widow at the loafers on the bench, and let the whole store hear him. "All those jars for one widow?" he said. "What do you plan to do, Nora Hale? Feed an army out of that soddy of yours?" The men on the bench laughed. They laughed because a bigger man had given them leave to, and there is no laugh cheaper than that one. Nora Hale did not laugh. She set her basket of eggs on the counter, counted them out with 2 fingers, and said what she had come to say. "Sugar," she told him, 10 pounds, and the paraffin wax, if the freight brought it. "It brought it," Purcell said. The squirrel woman'll want her wax. Boys, that was the name that rode out the door on the laugh into a Kansas October in the year 1885, and it stuck to her like a burr on a hem. The squirrel woman. In the town of Cedar Ford they had been calling her that for going on 6 years, and every man on that bench knew exactly how the name had come. And not one of them cared to say it plain. Here are the 2 things you need, and then no more telling for a good long while. Her husband had died in the prairie fire of 1879, and the winter after that fire the burned-out widow and her boy had very nearly starved in a half-roofed soddy while Cedar Ford looked the other direction. The town had been ashamed of itself ever since. Shame is a heavy thing to carry, so they had set it down and made a joke of her instead. It is easier to laugh at a woman than to remember what you did not do for her. Nora took her sugar and her wax and her change, and she walked out under the swinging bell with her chin level. She was young yet, not 30, dark hair pinned in a low plain knot. Hands already gone rough at the knuckles from paraffin and brine and the wooden handle of a jar lifter. She wore a work dress, the deep blue of cornflowers, the one bright thing about her, and she carried herself through that store like a woman who had somewhere to be and food to put by before the frost. Behind her the laugh was already dying, as laughs do when the one they are aimed at will not stay to hear them. Out at the hitching rail a rancher named Asa Croft had heard the whole of it through the open door, and he did not laugh either. He was a lean, weathered man with a dark hat gone soft at the brim, and he ran cattle on a creek place 3 miles east. And he had buried a wife of his own and knew a thing or 2 about what a town will do to a person it has decided to be finished with. He waited until she had her basket settled on the wagon seat. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I've a proposition, and there's nothing soft in it." She looked at him the level way you look at a stranger who has spoken your name aloud. "Then say it plain, Mr. Croft. I've a crew of 6 men to feed through the winter," Asa said. "I cook worse than any of them, which is a marvel. There's a room off my kitchen, dry and warm, for you and the boy. And there's an old stone-lined root cellar on the creek bank that stood empty since my mother passed. You put your jars in it. I'll not touch a one." He turned his hat in his hands. "That's the whole of it. Cook for wages and board." Nothing more said. Nora studied him a long moment. There was no color in his face that told her anything but the truth of it. "And the talk," she said. "There will be talk, and you know it. There's talk now," Ada said. "It hasn't fed your boy yet, has it?" "No," she admitted. "It has not." "Then let it talk to itself all winter. I'll be at my supper, which for once will be worth eating. You don't know yet that I can cook. I know a woman who puts up 600 jars can do a thing with a stove," Asa said. "And I know a woman who wouldn't dare bring eggs to Dade Purcell's counter and stand there while he laughed. That took more sand than my whole crew's got between them." She almost smiled at that and caught herself. She thought of the half-roofed soddy and the wind that came through it in January. She thought of Tom, who was 8 and growing out of his boots faster than she could resole them. "I'll want the cellar to myself," she said. "My rose, my count, my key. If a jar goes missing, I'll know it, and I'll say so." "Your key," Asa agreed, "and I'd not have you any other how. A woman who won't count her own stores isn't worth the boarding." "Then I'll cook," said Nora Hale, and that was the bargain, made at a hitching rail in 3 minutes, with the whole matter of love left carefully unspoken for a year and more. Now, the jars. You will want to know about the jars, because the whole town wanted to know and none of them ever asked her, and that is the very heart of this thing. They came out of a book, her mother's book, a grease-stained copybook with a cracked leather spine, carried west out of the hungry winter of 1861 back east, when a war had eaten the roads and the freight, and a family had lived a whole season on what a woman had thought to put up the summer before. On its first page, in a dead woman's pencil, was a line Nora had read so many times she no longer had to look at it. "Lay something aside against the winter you are in. Lay more aside against the lean year that comes after a fire. And lay the most of all against the winter nobody around you believes is coming." Her mother had called it the 3 winters rule, and she had died believing it, and Nora had carried the book across the burned ground of her own life and had never once broken it. So while Cedar Ford laid in what it needed for 1 winter and laughed at the woman who laid in 3, Nora Hale worked. That was the middle of it, and it was the long, quiet part, the part a body can settle down into of an evening. She picked, and she brined, and she sealed. Through August and into the cool of September, the peaches came in, and the tomatoes, and the beans, and the plums off the creek trees, and the corn she traded eggs and mending for. She scalded the glass in a wash boiler over the yard fire. She dipped the paraffin and poured the caps thin and even. She packed the carrots and the beets down in boxes of clean creek sand so they would keep dark and cold and sweet till spring. And she counted. Every jar that went on to the stone shelves of Asa Croft's old cellar she counted, and she wrote the number in her mother's book below her mother's rule, the rows climbing like a tide, slow and then all at once. Past 300, past 4, past 5. The lamp made a small gold room of that cellar at night, and the field glass caught it and threw it back. Amber and peach gold and the deep red of the cherries, until the dark shelves looked like a church window laid on its side. Tom took to helping her down there, holding the lamp while she worked, and one evening he asked the question the whole town was too proud to ask. "Mama," he said, "why do we put by so much more than the Fenns?" Timmy Fenn says, "We're squirrels." Nora set down her jar lifter. "Does he?" she said. "He didn't mean it ugly. They never do." She sat him down on the stone step and opened the book to the first page and put his finger on the pencil line. "Read it me." He read it slow, all 3 of the seasons his grandmother had named. "But it says nobody believes in the last one," Tom said. "So how are you supposed to know to get ready?" "You don't know," his mother told him. "That's the whole trick of it. You get ready for the thing you can't prove is coming, because the folks who wait on proof are the folks who starve. Your grandmother learned as much in a war. I learned it in a fire. And I'd sooner you had it from a book on a warm step than by going hungry like we did." Tom folded the book shut careful and gave it back to her, and did not ask again for a good while. Asa never came down those steps, but a man tells you what he is by what he does when he thinks no one is keeping count, and Asa Croft did 2 things that winter that Nora did keep count of. He hauled creek sand for her root boxes on his own back, barrow after barrow, and set it by the cellar door without a word. And one still evening she found that the cellar door, which had stuck and screamed on its hinges since the day she came, had been planed smooth at the sill and oiled at the hinge, so that it swung quiet as a whisper, and a woman with her arms full of glass could nudge it shut with her hip. "You fixed my door," she said to him at supper. "Not quite a question. It wanted fixing. It's not your cellar to keep up. That was the bargain." "A door's a door," Ozza said, and passed the bread. "I don't like a thing on my place that screams when it swings. Never have." And that was the whole conversation, which told her more than a speech would have. She never thanked him for it in words. What she did instead was mend the burned-scarred lining of his winter coat where an old ember had eaten through it, small stitches, the kind that take an evening, and she left the first jar of peach preserves of the whole year sitting on his saddle where he would find it at dawn. He found it. He did not mention it. He ate it on his bread for a week and put the empty jar back on her shelf, washed, which is a thing a man does not do unless he has been raised right or has learned late what a jar costs. The town, of course, kept talking. There were 2 or 3 who kept it going, and one of them was a Mrs. Ada Finn, who had a sharp tongue and a pew near the front. But even a tongue like that revises itself when the evidence keeps walking past in a cornflower dress with a straight back. Ada Finn came out to the creek place one November afternoon, ostensibly to return a dress pattern, and she went home having seen the cellar shelves. "You've enough there for the whole street," she said, standing up at the head of the stairway. "I've enough for what's coming," Nora answered. "And what's coming?" "I don't know," said Nora. "That's why I put by." Ada Finn was quieter after that. Not kind, just quieter. That is a start. Then came the dark of the year, and the dark of the story with it. Because a tale like this always has a night in it where the whole thing nearly comes apart. It was the harvest social at the church. Nora had baked and brought, as she always did, more than her share, and Dade Purcell had a cup of cider in him and an audience around him, and he found her at the trestle table laying out her plums. "I'll say a thing plain," Purcell announced, loud enough to carry to the doors. "There's food in this county held back from honest trade and locked in a cellar by a woman who won't sell it and won't share it. I call that hoarding. I call it unchristian, is what I call it. And I'll not extend my credit to a hoarder. Your book's closed at my store, Mrs. Hale, as of tonight." The hall went quiet. Somewhere a fiddle stopped. Nora set the last plum down and straightened. "You've had 6 years to ask me why I put food by," she said, and her voice did not rise. "You never once asked. You laughed instead. That was easier for you, and I understand why. It is always easier. Don't preach at me, woman. I'm not preaching. I'm answering. You asked what I plan to do with all those jars." She untied her apron and folded it over her arm. "You may close your book, Mr. Purcell. My mother taught me to keep mine and to close it to no one who's hungry. There's the difference between us, and there always has been." She left the social early. And that same week, as if the year meant to test all of her at once, a shelf brace in the cellar cracked in the cold, and a full shelf came down in the dark, and 36 quarts of her summer burst on the stone floor. She found it by lamplight, peaches and glass and a winter's work running together in the cold, and the sweet ruined smell of it filling the little gold room that had been her one clean triumph. That was the night Nora Hale came the closest she ever came to quitting. She stood in the mess of it with a lamp shaking in her hand, and she did the arithmetic that despair always offers. There were freighters who would buy the whole cellar at a hard price. There was a sister in Wichita with a spare room and a kind husband. There was a road out and a boy who could be raised somewhere that did not laugh at his mother. She sat down on the bottom step with her mother's book, and she did not write a surrender in it. She wrote the loss. 36 quarts, the date, the cracked brace, plain and square as her mother would have written it. That was the rule her mother had really taught her. Under all the receipts, you do not close the book on a bad night. You write the bad night in it, and then you turn the page and go on. Asa found her there near midnight when he saw the lamp still burning down the bank. He looked at the ruin, and he looked at her, and he offered her no pity, which she could not have borne, nor any money, which she would have refused. "I'll cut you new braces from the oak by the barn," he said. "Green oak. It won't crack in the cold like that pine did." Then, because he was who he was, he said the truest thing anyone had said to her in 6 years. "You keep a better cellar than my mother did, and she fed this whole creek through the war. Don't you dare quit on it." "I wasn't going to," Nora said. "You were sitting there doing the sum." "I've seen that sum done before. It ends with a wagon and a sold-off place and a woman telling herself she chose it." "There's a sister in Wichita," Nora said, because she would not lie to him. "A spare room, a kind man for a brother." Tom would grow up somewhere nobody had ever heard the word squirrel. He'd grow up somewhere nobody had ever heard of you being right either, Asa said. That's a different thing than safe. She looked at the glass on the floor a long while. "My mother lost a whole crock of pickled beans the winter of the war," she said finally. "Wrote it in the book. 2 words under it. Plant more." That was the whole of her comfort, and it was enough. "Then do what your mother did," said Asa Croft. "Write it down. And plant more." That's cold comfort from a cattleman. "It's the only kind that ever kept anybody fed," he said, and for the first time that night she almost smiled. Now hold on to that book and that loss written in it, because here is the thing the whole of Cedar Ford was about to learn, and none of them had ever thought to ask. It was written in a dead woman's pencil on the first page. The 3rd season, the one nobody credits until it is standing in the dooryard. That season was coming. It came on a wind. It was late October, and the prairie had cured to tinder under a month with no rain, and it arrived as the worst of them always arrive. First as a smudge of gray on the western horizon, then a red line walking, then a roar you felt in the ground before ever you heard it in the air. Cinders fell on Cedar Ford like a filthy snow. The whole town turned out with wet sacks and buckets from the creek, and Asa's crew rode in to stand the line beside them, and Nora Hale stood in that bucket brigade with her sleeves rolled and soot on her cornflower dress, and fought for the town that had laughed at her, the same as everyone else did, because that is exactly who she was. They saved the houses. They saved the church. But the fire took the grain elevator with a winter's threshed wheat in it, and it took the mercantile's back warehouse with Purcell's whole laid in stock, and it took the railroad trestle over the gorge east of town, timber and iron together, so that when the flames finally lay down at dawn there was no elevator, no warehouse, and no way on God's earth for a single freight car to reach Cedar Ford until the trestle could be rebuilt. And the first hard snow was 10 days off. Everyone knew it. You could smell it behind the smoke. Cedar Ford woke the morning after the fire to a plain and terrible sum. The freight road was closing behind the snow. The stores had burned, and there was not enough food inside the town to carry 40 families to a spring thaw, except in a stone-lined cellar on a creek bank 3 miles east, where a squirrel woman had been laughing stock enough to lay in 3 winters when everyone else laid in 1. Here is how one widow's cellar carries a town, since you have been patient and the book has kept its promise long enough. It was the 3 winters rule doubled. She had laid in against the season she was living through. She had laid in, out of an old scar, against the lean months that follow a burning. And this year, with Asa's garden ground to plant, and her wages paid partly in his beef and his flour, she had stored more than she ever had in her whole life, against the disaster nobody around her would credit. It was not luck, and it was not madness. It was a dead woman's arithmetic, kept faithfully by a living one, in a cellar full of quiet glass. Nora went down the steps at first light with Tom holding the lamp, and she counted the shelves one last time, because her mother had taught her to count true before you give, so you give fair. 612 quarts, she told the boy, less the 36 we lost. Write it in the book. All of it? Tom said. For the whole town? For the whole town, Nora said. Now hush and hold the light steady. Then she took a piece of chalk and she wrote on the smooth plain door, not a price, but a tally. Families first with children, so many jars to a house a week, roots to follow when the glass ran low. A fair share, counted, so that 600 quarts would walk 40 families 90 days to the thaw, and no farther than it could honestly go. She did not open a store, she opened a door. The first crate she filled, she put into the arms of Dade Purcell's wife, for the Purcell children, and when the woman began to weep and reached for her purse, Nora closed the woman's hand over the coins with both of her own. Put that away, Nora said. I didn't put food by to sell. But you've every right. My husband closed his book to you not 2 months past. Everybody heard him do it. You've every right to close yours to us now. I've the right, Nora agreed. I've no wish. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. She pressed a second crate into the woman's arms, jam and beans, and a jar of the peaches. Your littlest one, is she over the croup? She is. How did you know that? A mother hears things across a pew. Nora looked past the weeping woman, out the cellar door and down the long road toward the burned town. I put it by so nobody in Cedar Fort ever stands where I stood in '79. That's payment enough. That's all the payment there is. Now, go feed those babies and send the Kessler boys down, for their mother can't fetch, and I'll not have her trying in this snow. And she did not gloat. Understand that, because it is the whole of her. There is no scene in this story where Nora Hale stands on the mercantile porch and tells the men on the bench what they can do with their laughing. She fed them instead. She fed the men who had laughed at her for 6 years, jar by counted jar, and she wrote each family's share in her mother's book beside the old receipts, and she took not one coin. And she never once said the words "I told you so," because those words had never been the point of any of it. The point had always been that nobody's boy should go hungry in a town that could have fed him and did not. The count ran down through the winter as the snow ran deep. 612 to start, by the deep of December. When the drifts came to the eaves and the first babies of the winter came sound and fed, the shelves were down to 480. By the false thaw of the midwinter warm spell that fooled no one who could smell weather, 300. By the last long stretch of February, with the trestle still down and the road still shut, 174. and Nora chalking the tally lower on the door, and Tom hauling crates on a sled to the houses that had no man to fetch. By the first soft edge of March, when the icicles began to weep off the elevator's black bones, 61 courts remained, and every family in Cedar Fort still ate, and there was not one funeral for hunger in the whole of that terrible winter. They came to the cellar, all of them, across that whole 90 days. Ada Finn came on a January morning with her chin low and stood at the top of the smooth swinging steps she had once refused to descend. "I said a thing to you in the fall," Ada began, "about you having enough for the whole street." "You did," Nora said, filling a crate. "I meant it ugly. I know you did." Nora set 2 jars of beans on top and a crock of honey beside them. "Take the honey for your throat. You've been coughing since Christmas. I can hear you across the pew." Ada Finn stood there holding the crate and could not seem to make her feet move. "Why are you being kind to me?" she said, and it was not quite a question. "Because being unkind to you costs food I'd rather your grandbabies ate," said Nora. "Go on home, Ada. Come back Thursday." And Ada Finn went home and came back Thursday, and by February she was carrying crates to the shut in houses herself, which is what an apology looks like when a proud woman means it. And it was at the church. When the road opened and the first freight crawled over the mended trestle in the last week of March, that Dade Purcell stood up in front of the town without being asked to. He was not a graceful man, and he did not become one. He held his hat against his chest, and he looked at Nora Hale in her pew, and his voice had no bench laugh left in it at all. "I laughed at her for 6 years, Purcell said. "I called her a squirrel, and I closed my book to her the very autumn before she opened her cellar to my children. I don't rightly know how a man's meant to carry a thing like that, but I'll stand here and say it out loud so my saying it costs me something in front of you all. I was wrong. I was wrong for 6 years. And she fed my babies anyway, and asked me for nothing, not even the apology I'm making. That's worse than being shamed. That's being forgiven before you've earned it." He sat down heavily. "That's the whole of what I've got to say." Nora did not answer him from the pew. She had learned a long time ago that the answer to being right is not to say that you are. But the town said it for her. In a manner, a town says such things. The Grange came to her that spring and asked would she teach the putting up to the young wives, the hot water bath, and the paraffin, and the brine, and the sand boxes, so that no Cedar Ford winter would ever again hang by the thread of one woman's cellar. The county paper printed her mother's calendar, page by page through that summer, when to pick and when to seal, and how much to lay by for a family of 6. And at the head of the very first column they printed the name Nora asked them to print, which was not her own name at all. It was her mother's name, and the year 1861. So that the woman who first wrote the rule in a hungry winter back east was written at last into the record of a Kansas town she never once saw. And Asa Croft. There was still the matter of Asa Croft, left unspoken at a hitching rail for a year and a winter and a spring. He came to the cellar door on a mild evening when the last of the snow was gone off the creek bank and the first green was showing along it, and he found Nora sitting low on the cellar stair with the book open on her knee, counting what was left and reckoning what to plant to fill the shelves again. He stood at the top of the steps a while. In the door he had planed smooth so it would swing quiet. And he took off his hat. "The thaw's come," Asa said. "Your bargain was through the winter. You're free of it now, and I'll not hold you." Nora looked up at him from the little gold room of her lamplight. I know what the bargain was, Mr. Croft. I'm not speaking of the bargain, Asa said. He turned his hat once in his hands, and then he stopped turning it. And he said the 4 plain words he had been carrying up that creek path since October. Stay past the thaw. She was quiet a moment. Then Nora Hale closed her mother's book over her finger to keep the place, as you do when you mean to go on writing in it, and she gave him the only answer there was. I'd already planted for it, she told him. Put the seed in a week ago, the whole south row. I was only waiting to see if you'd find the nerve to ask. You knew, Asa said. I lay in for the things I can't prove are coming, said Nora. You ought to know that about me by now. Years on, the cellar was still there on the creek bank, and the shelves were still full, and the labels were written now in a grown man's careful, square hand in Tom's hand. And on a summer evening at the Grange Hall in Cedarford, a new bride with flower on her sleeves sat copying receipts out of a borrowed copybook with a cracked leather spine, and she came to the first page, and she read the line there aloud to the woman beside her. Put by for the winter you are in, she read, half laughing at how old-fashioned it sounded. Put more by for the lean year after a fire. And lay the most of all against the winter nobody believes is coming. She stopped laughing. Who wrote that? A woman who is right, said the neighbor, for 6 laughed at years before anyone thought to thank her. Copy it down. Every word. And the bride copied it down, every word. And in 100 kitchens in that county and in yours, if you have ever kept a thing, everybody told you to throw out. The winter nobody believed in came, and somebody was ready for it. Because once a woman with a level chin and a cornflower dress had refused, through 6 laughed at years, to stop.